What separates the men who collapse under pressure from those who emerge stronger? What allows some individuals to not just survive catastrophic change, but to actually thrive when everything around them is falling apart? If you've ever watched society panic while you remained calm, if you've ever felt that quiet confidence when others were desperately seeking direction, if you've naturally gravitated towards self-reliance while your peers clung to crumbling systems, you're about to discover why you're built differently. This isn't another motivational speech filled with empty platitudes. This is a deep examination of the 12 core traits that make Sigma males virtually crisis-proof. We're going to explore the psychological frameworks, practical capabilities, and strategic mindsets that allow these men to navigate chaos with unprecedented effectiveness. Whether you're facing economic collapse, social upheaval, personal catastrophe, or global crisis, these principles will show you not just how to survive, but how to position yourself as one of the few who remain standing when the dust settles. The content you're about to consume could fundamentally change how you prepare for and respond to life's inevitable disruptions. If you're serious about becoming truly anti-fragile, gaining from disorder rather than being destroyed by it, then subscribe to Official Sigma Male right now. We don't waste your time with surface-level advice or recycled motivational content. We go deep into the psychology, strategy, and practical wisdom that separates high-value men from the masses. Hit that subscribe button, because what comes next might be the most valuable framework for resilience you'll ever encounter. 1. Strategic independence. Listen, when everything falls apart around you, there's one truth that separates survivors from victims: the ability to stand alone without breaking. While most men collapse under pressure, desperately clinging to systems and people who can't save them, the Sigma male thrives in chaos because he's been preparing for it his entire life without even realizing it. Strategic independence isn't just about being self-reliant. It's about constructing your life in a way that external collapse doesn't touch your core foundation. Think about it. When the economy crashes, when relationships dissolve, when social structures crumble, who survives? The man who built his castle on someone else's land, or the man who owns the ground beneath his feet? The Sigma understands something fundamental that alpha males often miss in their pursuit of dominance, and beta males never grasp in their pursuit of comfort. True power comes from needing nothing and no one. This doesn't mean isolation, it means immunity from dependency. When you need nothing, you can appreciate everything. When you depend on no one, you can genuinely connect with everyone. Consider Marcus, a software engineer I know who lost his six-figure corporate job during the 2020 pandemic. While his colleagues panicked, sending hundreds of desperate applications and watching their savings evaporate, Marcus barely flinched. Why? Because for years he'd been quietly building 3 different income streams, maintaining minimal expenses, and developing skills across multiple domains. He wasn't lucky, he was strategically independent. Within 60 days, he was earning more than his previous salary through freelance work and his side projects. The crisis didn't break him because he'd never built his identity or survival around a single point of failure. Strategic independence operates on 3 critical levels that every Sigma naturally cultivates. First, financial independence, not just having money, but having diverse, resilient income sources that can't be eliminated by a single employer or market shift. The Sigma doesn't put all his resources in one basket because he understands that every system eventually fails. He maintains liquid assets, develops multiple marketable skills, and keeps his lifestyle lean enough that he can survive significant income drops without panic. Second, emotional independence. The capacity to maintain your psychological equilibrium regardless of external validation or rejection. When society goes crazy, when everyone around you loses their minds to fear or hysteria, the Sigma's internal compass remains steady. He's not cold or unfeeling, but his sense of self isn't tied to others' opinions or the collective mood. This emotional sovereignty becomes invaluable during crisis when panic spreads like wildfire and rational thinking becomes a rare commodity. Third, operational independence, the practical ability to handle life's necessities without constant external support. Can you fix things? Can you solve problems without immediately calling for help? Can you adapt to changing circumstances without falling apart? The Sigma maintains a broad skill set not because he's paranoid, but because competence creates freedom. When systems fail, the specialist who can only do one thing becomes helpless, while the Sigma who's cultivated diverse capabilities adapts and overcomes. This strategic independence manifests in small daily choices that compound over time into crisis-proof resilience. The Sigma doesn't lease his car. He buys reliable used vehicles he can maintain himself. He doesn't order takeout every night. He knows how to prepare nutritious meals. He doesn't rely solely on GPS. He understands navigation and spatial awareness. These aren't about being cheap or paranoid. They're about maintaining agency when convenient systems disappear. The beautiful paradox of strategic independence is that it actually makes you more valuable to others during crisis. When everyone else is drowning, the man who can swim becomes indispensable. Your independence doesn't isolate you. It positions you as a resource rather than a liability. People naturally gravitate towards stability during chaos, and the strategically independent Sigma becomes a lighthouse in the storm. But here's what most people miss about strategic independence. It's not built during the crisis. It's built in the quiet years before. Every time you choose to learn a new skill instead of scrolling mindlessly, every time you save instead of spending on status symbols, every time you develop your inner resources instead of seeking external validation, you're building crisis immunity. The Sigma understands that preparation isn't paranoia. It's simply refusing to be caught helpless when circumstances inevitably change. The modern world has created unprecedented dependency. Most men can't change a tire, can't grow food, can't manage their emotions without medication, can't spend a day without digital entertainment. They've outsourced so much of their capability that they're completely vulnerable to system disruption. The Sigma rejects this comfortable helplessness, not from fear, but from a deep understanding that freedom requires capability, and capability requires continuous development. Strategic independence also means maintaining optionality, always having a plan B, C, and D. The Sigma doesn't just have one career path. He has multiple directions he could pivot toward. He doesn't just have one location he's tied to. He maintains the flexibility to relocate if necessary. He doesn't just have one worldview. He can adapt his thinking to new information without his identity crumbling. This cognitive and practical flexibility is what allows him to not just survive crisis, but to thrive in it, while others are paralyzed by the collapse of their single-path plans. 2. Emotional self-regulation. The ability to control your emotional state during crisis separates survivors from victims. While others panic or freeze, the Sigma male maintains equilibrium that allows clear thinking when it matters most. Emotional self-regulation isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about processing them without being controlled by them. Fear, anger, and stress contain valuable information. The Sigma extracts that information, then chooses his response rather than reacting automatically. During the 2008 crisis, I knew two brothers who lost their jobs. David spiraled into rage and depression, blaming everyone. 3 years later, he was still unemployed. James felt the same emotions, but gave himself 3 days to feel everything. On day 4, he focused only on what he could control. Within 5 months, he'd built a consulting business exceeding his old income. The Sigma understands that feelings are valid, but not always accurate. He observes his emotions. I'm experiencing panic right now. That observation creates space between feeling and action. Most people collapse that space. They feel fear and immediately act from fear. The Sigma acts from reason, informed by emotion. Practical techniques include physiological control, slow breathing, muscle relaxation, exercise that burns stress hormones, cognitive reframing, asking, what opportunities does this create? Emotional granularity, identifying specific feelings rather than vague distress. This emotional mastery appears as supernatural calm to others, but the Sigma does feel everything. He's simply developed the capacity to feel without being hijacked. His stability doesn't just benefit him, it stabilizes everyone around him during chaos. Most crucially, emotional self-regulation preserves cognitive resources for problem-solving rather than wasting them on emotional spirals. Crisis doesn't care about feelings, it only responds to actions. 3. Practical skill set diversity. When systems collapse, specialists become helpless while generalists adapt and survive. The Sigma male doesn't put all his capability into one narrow domain. He deliberately cultivates diverse practical skills that compound into crisis-proof competence. This isn't about being a master of everything. It's about strategic capability across multiple domains so that when one system fails, you have others to rely on. Can you fix things, grow food, navigate without GPS, handle basic medical emergencies, code, negotiate, fight if necessary? Consider Tom, an accountant who seemed ordinary until the pandemic hit. While colleagues panicked about job security, Tom was fine. He could code well enough to automate processes, had carpentry skills that generated side income, knew basic electrical work, could grow vegetables, and had taught himself digital marketing. When his firm downsized, he assembled these skills into 3 different income streams within weeks. The Sigma builds this diversity intentionally. Every few months, he identifies a gap in his capability and fills it, not from paranoia, but from understanding that competence creates options and options create freedom. When you can only do one thing, you're vulnerable. When you can do 10 things reasonably well, you're adaptable. This practical diversity operates across 4 key areas. Technical skills. Can you fix, build, or create tangible things? Financial skills. Can you manage money, invest, or generate income multiple ways? Physical skills. Can you handle yourself in confrontation, maintain your health, or perform manual labor? Social skills. Can you negotiate, persuade, lead, or build networks? The beautiful part is how these skills synergize. Learning to code teaches systematic thinking that improves your financial analysis. Martial arts training builds confidence that enhances negotiation. Carpentry develops problem-solving that transfers to business challenges. Each skill makes learning the next one easier. Most men today are dangerously specialized. They're brilliant at one thing and helpless at everything else. They can't change a tire, can't cook a proper meal, can't handle basic home repairs. They've outsourced so much capability that any system disruption leaves them paralyzed. The Sigma rejects this comfortable incompetence. He maintains what I call operational sovereignty, the ability to handle life's necessities without constant external support. This doesn't mean doing everything yourself. It means being capable enough that you choose interdependence rather than requiring it. 4. Minimal external validation. When society's approval becomes your oxygen, society's disapproval becomes your death sentence. The Sigma male survives crisis because his sense of self-worth isn't hostage to external validation that evaporates when systems collapse. Most men are psychological slaves to other people's opinions. They need constant affirmation, likes, status symbols, and social approval to feel okay about themselves. When crisis hits and those validation sources disappear, they experience identity death. The Sigma never built his foundation there, so he never suffers that collapse. This isn't about arrogance or not caring what anyone thinks. It's about having an internal compass that remains steady regardless of external weather. The Sigma values genuine feedback and learns from criticism, but his core sense of worth doesn't swing wildly based on others' changing opinions. During the 2020 lockdowns, I watched men fall apart because they couldn't get their validation fixes. No gym to show off at, no office to perform status in, no social gatherings to peacock at. Their entire identity was built on external mirrors, and when those mirrors disappeared, they discovered there was nothing underneath. The Sigma had already done the internal work. He knows his values, understands his capabilities, and maintains self-respect based on his own standards rather than society's fluctuating judgments. When external validation vanishes, he doesn't even notice because he wasn't depending on it. This minimal need for external validation creates several crisis advantages. First, you make better decisions because you're not constantly calculating how choices will look to others. Second, you're not devastated when people criticize your crisis response. Third, you can take unconventional actions that others are too socially anxious to attempt. The pathway to this internal validation is simple but not easy. Develop genuine competence, live according to your own values, and stop performing for an audience. Every time you do something solely for external approval, you weaken yourself. Every time you act from internal standards, you strengthen yourself. 5. Adaptive thinking patterns. Rigid thinking breaks during crisis. Adaptive thinking bends, evolves, and finds new paths forward. The Sigma male survives because his cognitive flexibility allows him to update beliefs, pivot strategies, and see opportunities others miss when circumstances shift violently. Most people have a single model of how the world works, and when reality violates that model, they malfunction. Their predictions fail, their strategies stop working, and they freeze because they can't mentally accommodate the new reality. The Sigma maintains multiple mental models and updates them continuously based on new information. This adaptive thinking isn't wishy-washy or unprincipled. It's intellectually honest. When evidence changes, conclusions change. When strategies stop working, strategies adapt. The Sigma doesn't cling to ideas just because he's previously invested in them. He values truth over being right, which means he's willing to be wrong and adjust. I saw this clearly in a business partner who refused to adapt when our industry shifted. He kept insisting the old model would return, that the changes were temporary, that we just needed to wait it out. His rigid thinking cost him everything. Meanwhile, another colleague immediately recognized the paradigm had shifted permanently and rebuilt his entire approach. 5 years later, the adaptive thinker is thriving, while the rigid thinker is bitter and broke. Adaptive thinking requires several cognitive practices. First, actively seeking disconfirming information, deliberately looking for evidence that challenges your current beliefs. Most people seek confirmation. The Sigma seeks truth. Second, maintaining multiple working hypotheses rather than committing prematurely to one explanation. Third, updating probability assessments as new data arrives rather than clinging to initial predictions. The Sigma also practices perspective taking, mentally simulating how the situation looks from completely different viewpoints. This isn't about being relativistic, it's about gathering maximum information before deciding. The person who can only see from one angle misses opportunities and threats that are obvious from other vantage points. Crisis rewards cognitive flexibility because the rules change rapidly. The strategies that worked yesterday may be useless today. The Sigma doesn't just accept this. He expects it and has already built mental agility through continuous practice in normal times. 6. Resource management mastery. Crisis reveals who actually understands resource management versus who's been coasting on abundance. The The Sigma male survives because he's always operated with lean efficiency, strategic reserves, and the ability to extract maximum value from minimum inputs. Resource management isn't about being cheap, it's about being strategic. It's knowing the difference between assets and liabilities, between investments and expenses, between what adds value and what just signals status. Most men confuse consumption with success, buying things they don't need with money they don't have to impress people they don't like. The Sigma operates differently. He maintains a significant gap between earnings and expenses, not from fear, but from understanding that financial margin creates options. When crisis hits, he's not immediately desperate because he's built reserves. When opportunities appear, he has resources to deploy while others are tapped out. This extends beyond just money. The Sigma manages time as a non-renewable resource, investing it in high-leverage activities rather than dispersing it into low-value, busy work. He manages attention as a scarce asset in an economy designed to steal it. He manages energy by understanding his personal rhythms and allocating effort strategically rather than grinding constantly. Consider Mike, who earned less than most of his peers but consistently outperformed them during market downturns. Why? He kept 6 months of expenses in cash, owned appreciating assets instead of depreciating toys, and maintained minimal fixed costs. When the 2008 crisis hit, he bought assets from desperate sellers at massive discounts. His resource management discipline in good times created wealth-building opportunities in bad times. The Sigma also understands resource velocity, how quickly resources move through your system creating value. Hoarded resources create no value. Wasted resources destroy value. Strategically deployed resources compound value. He's constantly asking, is this resource positioned to create maximum impact, or is it sitting idle or being consumed without return? This mastery includes ruthlessly eliminating resource leaks, subscriptions you don't use, relationships that drain energy, commitments that generate no value, possessions that require maintenance without providing benefit. Every resource leak makes you slightly more vulnerable to crisis. 7. Psychological resilience. When everything falls apart, psychological resilience determines whether you keep fighting or give up. The Sigma male possesses deep mental toughness, built not from avoiding difficulty, but from consistently facing and overcoming it. Psychological resilience isn't about being unbreakable, it's about being able to break and rebuild stronger. It's the capacity to absorb massive setbacks, process the damage, and continue forward with renewed purpose. While others experience one major failure and quit permanently, the Sigma experiences 10 failures and extracts lessons from each one. This resilience develops through progressive exposure to difficulty. You don't build mental toughness by avoiding challenges. You build it by consistently choosing the harder path, embracing discomfort, and proving to yourself repeatedly that you can handle more than you think. Every time you push through when you want to quit, you make a deposit in your resilience account. I've watched this play out in combat veterans who transition successfully to civilian life versus those who struggle. The difference isn't trauma exposure. Many who struggle saw less combat than those who thrive. The difference is psychological resilience built through years of small victories over adversity. They've internalized a fundamental belief. I've survived worse than this, and I'll survive this too. The Sigma cultivates this through deliberate practice. He voluntarily chooses difficult tasks. He sets challenging goals that require sustained effort. He puts himself in uncomfortable situations regularly so that discomfort becomes familiar rather than paralyzing. When crisis arrives, it's not fundamentally different from challenges he's already overcome. It's just the next test. Psychological resilience also requires managing your internal narrative. The story you tell yourself about adversity determines how you respond to it. Is this crisis happening to you, or is it happening for you? Are you a victim of circumstances, or are you being forged into something stronger? The Sigma consciously chooses narratives that empower action rather than justify surrender. This doesn't mean toxic positivity or denying reality. It means refusing to catastrophize, maintaining perspective, and remembering that you're anti-fragile, capable of gaining from disorder. Crisis isn't just something to survive, it's an opportunity to prove your resilience and emerge upgraded. We've journeyed through 12 fundamental traits that transform the Sigma male from merely surviving crisis into thriving during it. From strategic independence to long-term vision maintenance, each characteristic builds upon the others to create an individual who is genuinely anti-fragile. Someone who gains strength from chaos rather than being destroyed by it. But here's what you need to understand. These aren't genetic gifts or lucky accidents. Every single trait we've discussed is developable. The strategic independence that protects you from systemic collapse, you build it through daily choices. The emotional self-regulation that keeps you steady when others panic, you cultivate it through practice. The diverse skill set that makes you invaluable during crisis, you develop it by consistently learning instead of passively consuming. The question isn't whether you have these traits right now. The question is whether you're willing to develop them before the next crisis hits. Because it will hit. That's not pessimism. It's reality. Economic cycles, social disruptions, personal catastrophes, these are features of life, not bugs. The only variable is whether you'll be prepared. The Sigma male isn't special because he has superhuman abilities. He's effective because he refuses to be helpless. He rejects comfortable dependency in favor of capable independence. He builds his foundation on principles and skills that can't be taken away by external circumstances. And most importantly, he does this work in the quiet years before crisis strikes, so that when chaos arrives, he's ready. Everything we've covered today is just the beginning. If you want to continue developing these crisis-proof characteristics, if you're serious about becoming the kind of man who doesn't just survive, but thrives regardless of external circumstances, then you need to subscribe to Official Sigma Male. We consistently deliver the deep, practical wisdom that transforms theoretical knowledge into lived capability. Don't just consume this content and forget it. Subscribe, engage, and commit to building yourself into someone who's genuinely ready for whatever comes next. Your future self, standing calm and capable in the middle of chaos, will thank you for the decision you make right now.